Hey guys, it's Matthew here once again, and we have recently been given a few Ascendancy overhauls and slight updates on the PoE Reddits, Twitters, whatever it is. And I wanted to go over the 4 that we currently have. Some pretty big, some kinda doesn't really make too much of a difference, but I wanted to just go over the changes and what I think they mean anyway. A lot of them, yeah, they won't really matter too much or won't really mean anything, but for some of them, makes them extremely viable and something very fun to play around with. So I'll start out with the one that most people are crying about, and that is the Gladiator, which is the one that also has the least amount of changes. So a lot of people have been like, oh, Gladiator didn't get many changes, rip Gladiator, Gladiator sucks, blah, blah, blah. Basically, I don't agree with that at all because the Gladiator was already a good Ascendancy. Right now, you go into the game, you log on, you can pick Gladiator. It's a pretty good Ascendancy and it works very well for lots of melee builds, and it's one of the best feeling Ascendancies out there, I feel. Those bleed pops really just enhance your physical melee sort of gameplay, so I don't think it really needs much of an adjustment or much of anything. So for the most part, nothing really happened, but we did get one extra little branch. And that is 5 and 6, which is Arena Challenger. 2% more attack and movement speed per Challenger charge. 25% chance to gain a Challenger charge when you hit a rare or unique enemy while in Blood stance, and gain a Challenger charge when you kill an enemy while in Sand stance. 10 to max Challenger charges. So if these charges are going to be pretty easy to get through the various stances with the new skills, then that's pretty goddamn huge. You're usually taking 1, 2, 3, 4, getting the good bleed nodes, the damage, and the explosions, and then quite often you'll either be taking 13, 14, 7, 10, just a bit of extra damage and utility and stuff like that, or you can build entirely into spell block, and if you do that, nothing's changed, it's still good. You can still go spell block, you can still go block, and get quite a lot of defensive pressure at the same time as offensive. But now, if you go full offensive like I would, you'd go 13, 14, and then 5 and 6, and that gives you 20% more attack speed. And if you look back at my previous character this league, the Lacerate Gladiator, I got a lot of attack speed in that character, and 20% more is absolutely nothing to sneeze at. Instead of 1.8 attack speed siege axes, for example, you're going to be at like 2.2 or 2.3 attack speed siege axes as a base, and if that's just put into the game right now, that's insane for extra attack speed. And instead of hitting like 11 or 12 Lacerate sort of attack speed per second, I'm going to be hitting like 15. It's crazy, so that one should feel very good, and Gladiator might still be the Ascendancy I try to start with, because a couple of the new skills look pretty damn nice, and this entire little gain seems rather good too. But the Berserker and Slayer definitely have something to say about that too. A little bit of the minor nodes, I think, got changed too to become more generic instead of just one-handed attack speed. I think it's what they currently are. But in any case, we're on to the Chieftain. Chieftain did get a fairly large rework, I'd say, because we do have quite a lot more paths and a lot more choices, but the too long didn't read sort of version is it's pretty good for Tectonic Slam. Definitely there's going to be a choice between Chieftain and Jug for Tectonic Slam. Although there currently kind of is that kind of choice, Jug is probably better. Right now, Chieftain's going to be very competitive in that sort of scenario. So we have 3 and then up to 1. That gives us a reliable way of getting endurance charges. So 35% chance to get endurance charge when you use a fire skill. Finally, Chieftain has a way of getting the endurance charges up reliably, especially if you're fire-based, especially if you're Tectonic Slam, and then going all the way up to 1, you get 3% more damage for each endurance charge lost recently, up to 15, and that should be up just about all of the time in Tectonic Slam. Quite a lot of extra endurance charges, and plenty other builds could probably make use of that too, but I think that's primarily going to be a big buff for Tectonic Slam. So going all the way up there for 4 points for Tectonic Slam seems pretty worth it. And then you got 5 and 6. Now that is going to be more of a totem thing, so damage dealt by your totems leech to you as life. That's not really changed at all. 50% increased effect of buffs granted by your active ancestor. Totems, that's rather big because you do use a War Chief totem or a Protector, and it gives you a fairly large buff to either attack speed or damage. 50% increased effect of that buff is actually pretty big, especially if you're going to be relying on having those totems up, like the War Chief totem. It should be up a lot of the time, so I think that one's actually pretty juicy. And then activation range by 100%, pretty big, and 25% increased area effect while you have a totem. So that's a fairly nice choice, and even just for plain War Chief totem Chieftain, that's a pretty big node there too. You then have 7 and 8, which is Salio Cleansing Water. Pretty similar node to before. I think the only change here is 50% increased life recovery rate if you've taken fire damage from an enemy hit recently. So it's a very strong defensive node now. I'm probably going to try and skip it as often as I can, but sometimes it'll still feel right, and it's a nice little change to that node getting better life recovery rate. So I think it's not bad at all. 9 and 10 didn't really change. That's just the totems are immune to fire damage, so I guess that's kind of nice, but that's all built into the 1 node as opposed to what used to be a 4 node, I believe. But then it just gives you less damage things near your totems, and more damage taken to things near your totems, or increased damage, but essentially a more damage multiplier. You then have this interesting looking thing, which is kind of a new thing for Ascendancies, I think. 11 and 12, we're looking at Ramako Sun's Light. So 15% fire pen, it's pretty damn nice, and then 25% chance to ignite, 15% more burning. Don't know how relevant that is in too many builds, but I think it can be something you can kind of build around at this point, for Ignite, for example. But Penetrate 15 fire, it's pretty good, and it's just 2 points, and then lets you go to 13 and 14, which gives you 1% of fire damage leeches life, 20% chance to cover rare or unique enemies in Ash for 10 seconds on hit, and 10% increased strength. So it's a pretty big fire damage node still. So if you're going your Tectonic Slam build, for example, for max damage, you are probably going all the way up to the top 1 and then all the way down to 14 through this way. Seems pretty strong in that way. Or you could instead go Namahu Flames Advance, 50% of Fizz convert to fire. Every 10 seconds, gain 100% of Fizz as extra fire for 4 seconds. That's also pretty good, and it's going to be kind of a tough decision as to which way you go, but it seems like a premier Tectonic Slam Ascendancy. There are obviously going to be other uses too, but I don't know if this really changes too much for the Chieftain overall, except for the fact that it becomes better for Tectonic Slam. At least that's how I look at it anyway, because I never really did Chieftains that were War Chiefs or totems and that sort of thing, but you definitely can at this point, and its totem viability has gone up a bit, I'd say. We then have the 2 big reworks in the form of, hold on a second, Slayer and Berserker. We'll start out with the one that came out first, and that is the Slayer. Holy shit, it's pretty big. So traditionally you're going the 4 points up here and 4 points up here and ignoring everything else. That might still be the case, but you do have some very tasty options to branch out with. So for the first 4, 3 and 4 here, Headsman, it's now been kind of messed around with and combined. So you now have 10% more damage if you've killed recently. That should be up a good portion of the time, almost always. Cannot reflect Fizz, as always, still good. 20% more damage against unique enemies. Now that's the damage that pretty much counts. Most white, blue, rare enemies don't really matter too much if you've got the big deeps against them, so that 20% more doesn't really matter. It's against the unique enemies that it really matters, and 20% more just for 1 point there is pretty damn good, and then a lot of the time you will still have a 10% more. So a lot of the time you're getting 30% more damage against unique enemies here. That's a pretty good note. You then go 5 and 6, and that is Bane of Legends. Kill enemies that have 20% or lower, so just 20% cull still, which is good, but I don't think it's too crucial. You get used to not needing to cull on everything else, so Slayer Cull, it only really comes in clutch against a few certain boss fights where you're really trying to finish them off, but it's nice. I just don't think it's that crucial. You then gain 20% increased attack speed for 20 seconds when you kill a rare or unique enemy, and then 20% increased movement speed when you kill an enemy. So 20% movement speed should be up almost always, which is nice quality of life, and 20% attack speed will be up mostly for mapping and that's pretty much it. You won't get to experience it against boss fights all that much unless you're carrying over your momentum. So overall, that one's still pretty good. 4 points are still, yeah, you could easily justify those. Against the enemy for single target, just a boss, 30% more damage a lot of the time, obviously not always, and then the 20% cull means you have damn near like half that boss's HP just done from those 4 nodes. You then have 7, 8, 9, and 10, which are still the leech nodes, still the premier leech nodes. So you have 7 and 8 going up to here. Cannot be stunned while leeching, same thing. You are immune to bleed while leeching, same thing. 20% of overkill is leeched as life. Still a very good node for all of that leech thing, but it only really becomes super good if you get 9 and 10, which is Brutal Fervor, still very strong with life leech effects and not removed at full life. But now you've also got 15% attack speed while leeching, 50% increased attack damage while leeching, and 6 reduced damage taken while leeching. It's a very strong defensive node now, and you could justify not taking it because of some of the other things that are really strong now too, but it is still Slayer's niche to have a huge overleech and take damage and then instantly recover it, and it's still very good quality of life if you want to play a Slayer, so it just makes it a bit nicer overall because you get plenty of damage by going these 4 and these 4 as well as that overleech, and if you're looking for that overleech, then Slayer is still the way to go, but you know, most builds don't have overleech. You can very much get used to that playstyle and then go something like these 4 points and then start to explore the other nodes. The other nodes are looking pretty tasty. So we'll start with the biggest one, which is the 1 and 2 crit and attack damage. So base critical strike chance for attacks with weapons is 8%. So a lot of weapons in the game right now have about 5 crit, right? Or maybe even 6. And that's what all of your percent scaling is based off of. So if you start out with 5 crit, you have 400% increased crit chance. You know, that'll go up to 25 crit, right? So you get an extra 20% on top of that. So it goes up to 25. If you then have that exact same weapon and it starts at 8 and you still have 400%, you're then going up to 40 crit, right? So it's a huge gain that way, and it means you don't have to really focus on the increased crit side of things from like Elder Chests or the Crit Strikes gem, for example. For a lot of weapons like, let's say, a Void Forge, a Star Forge, a Doomfletch Prism, a Lionized Glare, you can even go things like Itsiri's Disfavor now. There's a lot of weapons out there that are super strong and in the unique category that have really low crit, and this one node just makes them so much more viable for crit and so much stronger. And it's a lot of those, for example, but as well as that, you can go just plain rare weapons. Take a fast rare foil with 2 attack speed and 300 DPS. They're pretty cheap to come by right now if they don't have any crit. It'll have like 5.5 crit base. Now you can get it up to 8 crit base, which is really hard to do even on foils, just fully crafting them. And you can start out with 8 crit base, 300 DPS foil for pennies on the dollar, and your build is going to be insane from there on out. So I think that's a very strong node. You can easily build a lot of crit, especially early on. Crit is tough to build around with low gear and at the start of a league, whereas this type of node is going to make things so much easier for that. So that one's definitely something you can take, and you can go full offensive with all these nodes and then the crit ones, and then also pick up something like looking at 11 and 12. Impact, 50% global accuracy rating. Actually, I should mention 10 crit multi over here up to nearby. I mean, that's cool, bit of extra damage. A lot of the time you'll get more than 10, but it's not super big deal, I don't think. It's mostly the top node, and then nearby enemies have -30 to crit strike multi. Apparently enemies have about 130 to start with, so that brings them down to 100, and that means you won't get crit anywhere near as hard by enemies, but it's not super relevant, I don't think. It's just a nice little defensive buff too. Anyway, 50% increased global accuracy rating. That's just going to fill out your accuracy that little bit better. +2 to melee weapon and unarmed attack range. So for Cyclone or many other skills as well, that's pretty big, and that does make it the premier Cyclone class, I think. 5% increased area of effect per enemy killed recently, up to 50%. So a lot of the time, that's just 50% area, which is rather large as a nice additional little node. And then deal up to 15% more melee damage to enemies based on proximity. And a lot of the time, if you're pure melee, you will actually be on top of that single target enemy, right on top of them. So maybe 15% more damage there. If we're talking taking these four, these two for, like, let's say a Cyclone build, there's a good chance you're just about doubling your damage from a fucking Ascendancy, which is huge. So all of that there is rather tasty and a good lucrative option for, let's say, a Cyclone build, but also plenty of others too. 13 and 14 is then Masterful Form, 50% increased endurance charge duration, 50% increased frenzy charge duration, and your max endurance charges equal to your max frenzy charges. So I don't know about that one, if it's anywhere near as exciting as all the other shit. If you could ever really justify not taking that. If you're going the more defensive option, I'd say you are going up to 10, but I'm not really an expert in taking endurance charges or using them. That's pretty much all I'll say there. It's going to be hard to ever take something like that over 11, 12, 1, 2, 6, 10. There's a lot of options in Slayer, and I think it's going to be one of those where there's no real right choice. It's going to be up to the user and up to the build they're playing, but there's it's kind of a weird situation. In most Ascendancies, you're going to be like, okay, here's the best, taking that no matter what. Slayer, I think it's a big-ass question mark because there's a lot of choices you can make, and it's definitely one to actually think about before going into. So Slayer's looking very good and a very good option overall. I definitely recommend it for the start of the league so far. And then we come to the big boy Ascendancy rework, I guess. Berserker is one of the least played Ascendancies by far for the past year or so. Ever since the rework it had with Rage. The Rage mechanic was just too off-putting for most people. And the fact is that there's a lot of power creep in this game these days, and Ascendancies, for the most part, need to be well-rounded and give you more than just damage, because there's a lot of damage out there. In a lot of your builds, you will have more than enough damage to take on the entire game, and you just need to then have something that makes it feel better, some utility, or some defensive options, whereas Berserker just gave you pretty much damage and then made you take damage. And that's fucked up in a world where you really don't want to take more damage, like your Uber Elders, your tough maps, your deep delves, and at the same time you're not getting any defensive bonuses. So it's a double-edged sword there where you're taking more and not getting any more, and that makes it an extremely undesirable ascendancy. However, we've gone to a point where Rage isn't quite as bad in this rework, and as well as that, you get so much damage and attack speed that it might just be worth taking. So we'll start with 1 and 2. Flawless Savagery. There's a lot of crit going around here. 80% increased crit for your attacks, 20 to 30 physical damage to attacks. Now that's to your base damage, so if you have the shitter your weapon is, the faster your weapon is, the better something like that is going to be. It says if you've dealt a crit recently, and then 30 to crit multi, so that's a big node just by itself, especially in the early game. Then you go to 3 and 4. Blitz, 2% more attack speed per blitz charge, 10% reduced crit strike chance per blitz charge, gain a blitz charge on crit strike, and 20 max blitz charges. Now I can assume just randomly that you'll only get 1 blitz charge per attack, let's just say, so it'll still take a few seconds to build up your blitz charges even if you're attacking mega fast, but once that does happen, you'll have 40% more attack speed with your max blitz charges, which is insane. It's not just 40% increased attack speed, it's 40% more, which multiplies all of your other attack speed. And supposedly there's like a 5-second timer on blitz charges, so if you're not gaining blitz charges for about 5 seconds, then I guess they'll all drop off, but should be somewhat okay to manage and keep up, at least in most content, especially when you're attacking this fast and jumping from pack to pack that fast. So you get 200% reduced crit strike chance, and that means that it's going to be a little tough to keep up 100% of the time if you are non-crit and taking this type of node, but you do get a lot of crit over here and on the way there, so it's, you know, really if you're looking at the entire nodes together, 90% less or reduced crit chance. So overall, you're not really losing that much crit, and it's very manageable if you're going for a pure crit build and taking this for the attack speed. It's pretty damn insane for pure attack speed. You then have going Warbringer. So this is the Warcry node, which hasn't really changed. The only thing they've added is that you get a little bit of damage and attack speed when using these Warcries, and they've taken out the rage mechanic from it. Now that that's happened, I mean, this has always been a nice quality of life for a Berserker, but it's pretty tough to justify taking this, I think, compared to the other nodes, so it feels kind of dead in the water as far as I'm concerned. You then have 7 and 8, that's the leech nodes. Chances are you will try and maintain your leech nodes elsewhere or your leech elsewhere, but there's still some justification here because you do get 25 attack speed if hit recently. Probably fairly often you'll be getting hit recently. 50% increase max total recovery per second from life leech if you've taken a savage hit recently. So that is a fair amount as well, but not sure you really want to rely on that, especially without an overleech mechanic like Slayer. Chances are, if you're going to take something like this, you'll probably want the Slayer Leech Gloves. Don't know how easy they're going to be to get next league since they're a synthesis item, so we'll have to wait and see for that, but I don't think Pain Reave is all that good compared to the other stuff, so you're still taking Blitz most likely all of the time. And then the reworked Rage goes down here, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So 9 and 10 is Crave the Slaughter, gain 1 Rage on hit with attacks, no more than every 0.3 seconds. So if you're pure attacking pretty fast, getting lots of hits in, it'll take you about 15 seconds to get all of your rage up. 1% chance to deal double damage per 4 rage, ends up being about 12% chance to deal double damage. So overall, it's a fairly good node, giving you lots of rage and about 10 to 15% double damage. So, well, 12% specifically, but let's just say 10 to 15 for some fucking reason. And keeping all that up, all that rage up gives you 50 attack damage, 25 attack speed, and 10% movement speed, and then you degen a little bit of life, and it says it here exactly what it does. That is, lose 0.1% of your max life per second per rage while you are not losing rage. So that means that when you're actually attacking and gaining rage, you'll be degenning 5% per second, which is the time when it matters least, because that's when you're leeching and still in your fight, thus probably keeping your health up anyway. So it no longer degens you when you're like running around from pack to pack because you're losing rage, and that means you're not going to be copying that degen, which is currently a very annoying mechanic. Effects granted for having rage are tripled and cannot be stunned while you have at least 25 rage. So cannot be stunned is going to be almost always, and that's a huge quality of life for Berserker because you never want to get stunned and take massive hits. Instead, you definitely want to be leeching and attacking and killing things almost always, and quite often Berserkers definitely want to go out of their way to get cannot be stunned anyway, so that's good quality of life. But effects of rage are tripled, so that means you then have like 150% damage, 75 attack speed, and 30 movement speed all of the time, and supposedly that doesn't affect the degen or the double damage, so you still only have 12% chance to deal double damage there, and the degen should still only be 5%, but 75 attack speed, especially if you stack it with number 4 Blitz with the 40% more attack speed, and then you get these little attack speed nodes as well. You could easily justify not taking Carnage, Aspect of Carnage, which hasn't changed, just 40% more damage, and going pure big dick attack speed. I don't know, this entire thing is kind of confusing because that is just so much damage and attack speed that it's going to be tough after playing it and feeling that attack speed to ever go anything else, I think. I don't even know. It's hard to quantify exactly how much attack speed this is going to be because it's probably going to be more than anything you've ever felt in this game, Brightbeak style or anything else. And I think this will be a very fun one to play around with at least once. And if that's the case, then I'd say that's a successful rework because it's got everyone to jump in and at least try this shit out one time. And it looks like it's going to be super attack speed, super insane, and something very fun to play around with. And then on top of that, it's a very good crit ascendancy. It's a very good face breaker ascendancy, especially for crit build as well. And I think it's a pretty exciting rework. It does seem a bit weird that nodes like this still exist, 5 and 6. but I don't know. I don't think you're ever really taking them because of all the other good ones. It should be a lot of fun, and I think bow builds are going to be, played around with a bit on Slayer and Berserker, and not necessarily just Dead Eyes anymore, because there's so much to gain here. There's good movement speed to gain from both of them, but as well as that, a lot of damage, a lot of crit, a lot of attack speed. So that's my sort of review. I don't know if that really helped you, but basically went over everything I could. And I think there's some pretty good looking Ascendancies. And Gladiator, the one that people weren't so happy with, I think is still fine. Still going to be a good choice. It's not going to have quite as much attack speed as something like a Berserker, but it's a very well-rounded Ascendancy. And then we're still seeing supposedly some changes coming for Champion, and Jug has just a slight tweak for it as well. But we still have a Champion Ascendancy reveal that we going to be looking forward to. Maybe that changes things enough that it becomes competitive to the others as well. So I think that's it from me for these Ascendancy reworks. They look pretty damn good. All the new melee stuff looks really good too. Even if the Legion mechanic itself and the league sucks, which I don't think it will, even if it purely sucks, I think there's enough to keep you busy with all this Ascendancy rework and melee changes for the entire league. At least that's usually how it is for me. It's mostly about the big changes coming to the game and not necessarily the league or the league mechanic itself. So plenty of stuff to be excited about. Hope you guys are too. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.